All right, kids, welcome back. The Chris Salcedo Show. We're joined now by Jack Wyman. He's a Republican who's running for the 26th Congressional District in the great state of Texas. He's also a constitutional law professor at North Central Texas College. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be on your show.
Thank you, sir. The Democrats they made their case. The president's team wrapped up their defense today. What do you make of the contention that the Bolton so-called revelations, and we can't confirm whether they were revelations or not, but that John Bolton overshadowed the closing arguments of the president's attorneys? What do you think?
Well, he certainly had an impact, Chris. I think we know that. No one was expecting it. And it's hard to know what his motives are in doing it. We have to keep in mind that John Bolton, for as great a man as he is, and as greater and impressive a resume as he has, was someone who was terminated in his employment with the administration. And I think anytime that happens, it's just human nature to be a little bit resentful about why it happened or how it happened. And I'm not saying that that was the reason that he has done this and released this transcript of his forthcoming book now, but it certainly does raise questions, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it does as well. And I was saying this on radio today, that I've interviewed, talked with John Bolton, trusted John Bolton for many, many years. I will say I'm a little suspect as to the reason why he decided to do a tell-all book in the middle of an impeachment trial, to release it in the middle of an impeachment trial, in the middle of a presidential election. I just have not known Mr. Bolton to be that kind of guy that would do that kind of thing. But again, we'll see what happens. His attorney says that this vetting process for the manuscript is obviously broken. Well, obviously, because it's leaking out, and we'll hopefully get to the bottom of where that leak came from. But I wanted to ask you about the defense that the president's team put on. They talked about how the House Democrats omitted exculpatory evidence. They talked about how there was Democrat corruption in Ukraine, and the president was well-founded in investigating that corruption. And then they talked about how destructive this whole path is the Democrats have placed us on. So I'm asking you right now, do you think the Republicans' defense of the president, they actually hit the mark? Did they make their case?
I think it was an excellent defense, Chris. I agree with all of the points that they've made. There is absolutely no doubt that the president of the United States was justified in asking the president of Ukraine to look into possible corruption. When you realize that it involved the Bidens, Hunter Biden in particular, when one considers that we're talking about millions of dollars that has been paid by a corrupt Ukrainian gas company or energy company owned by a acknowledged corrupt oligarch in Ukraine, paid to the son of the second most important and most powerful office holder in our country, then I think the president has every right to ask for an investigation into this. After all, look at the timing, Chris. The fact is that Vice President Biden was placed in charge of the regional policy in which included Ukraine by President Obama. And then just months later, I think it was around April of 2014, all of a sudden his son Hunter gets placed on the board of directors of this energy company, and he is paid more than $83,000 a month, compared to $54,000 for a family of four a year. And I think there is very good reason to be suspicious. In matter of fact, I would go so far as to suggest this, and this hasn't been mentioned. President Trump perhaps would have been negligent in his responsibilities as commander-in-chief if he did not ask for an investigation into this possible corruption. He was certainly within his constitutional rights.
Yeah, and we have said that as well, that the president could be delinquent in his duties if he didn't actually ask about these things. And just because you run for president as a Democrat and you have a sitting Republican president doesn't immunize you from being investigated or being brought to account for things that you've done. Let me ask you, Mr. Wyman,
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, as a constitutional law professor, I'm sure you maybe talked about this with some of your students about the dangers of where the Democrat Party is taking this country, impeachment for politics' sake, the weaponizing of impeachment. And what happens to a society when both political factions don't accept the president of either one of those political factions? What is the future? What does it portend for the future of that country?
Well, I think it's a very disturbing development. In many ways, it's an American tragedy. I think after President Trump is acquitted in the Senate, and he will be, and after he is reelected president this November, and he will be by a comfortable margin, much of this impeachment is going to be a footnote in history, except for one thing. The Democrats, in their relentless partisan witch hunt, have set a very disturbing and very threatening precedent when it comes to presidential impeachment. And I fear that in the future, from here on out, the party that is not in the White House will be very tempted to use impeachment as a political weapon. And this is something that Madison and Franklin and others of our founders never intended for our country. They never intended impeachment to be a political weapon by people who have policy differences. If one looks at the impeachment of Andrew Johnson in 1868, for example, he was impeached because he fired Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War and violated some law that the Congress had passed saying that the president could not dismiss a cabinet official without congressional approval. Well, we look back on that and we say that was ludicrous. But in fact, it was the grounds for impeaching Andrew Johnson, and he was only saved in the Senate by one vote. So right. He could have been removed from office. And what's ironic, Chris, is that the Tenure of Office Act was declared patently unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So it was a bogus law to start with. But this is the kind of path we have set ourselves upon, I fear, with this impeachment.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think it's we. I think it is exclusively the Socialist Democrat Party who has done this to us. Professor Wyman, I appreciate the time and expertise here on the Salcedo Show. Thank you very much, sir.